Hi, everyone. This is Derek Harp, the founder and chairman of the Control Systems Cybersecurity Association International, or as we call it, just CSA. CSA is a 501c6 nonprofit workforce development association dedicated to helping grow, support, and sustain the professionals charged with the cybersecurity of control systems. We're specifically talking about those systems that have pumps and valves and actuators, real cyber to physical moving parts, and control nearly every aspect of our modern connected industries. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. It is my hope you find it inspirational or motivating or revealing or informative, and perhaps at times even a little entertaining. Take care and be well.
Hi, this is Derek Harp, the founder and chairman of CSA and the host of the CSA podcast show. I've got another great guest today lined up for you, Rob Putman, Global Manager of Cybersecurity Services at ABB Process Automation. If you don't know Rob, he is a U.S. Army veteran. He is a father, he is a technologist, a car enthusiast, a skier, a rock climber, a team builder, and definitely a leader in industry. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Derek. Happy to be here.
Well, Rob, I sort of start these things always in this sort of the same way. The backstory of modern cybersecurity superheroes. You know, where did you come from? What rock were you? Did you crawl out under, or vat did you get created in? You know, superheroes have to have a backstory. So, where did Rob start out?
All right. Well, first one's a tough one. So, superhero. Okay. Not really sure how I got here, but I've always, I think the origin of it was I've always been curious about how things work. Now, whether or not I approached that from a security perspective, I don't know, but I broke a lot of things trying to figure out how they worked, and I figured out a lot of ways that things worked in ways that they shouldn't. And I think that in many ways was the origin of how I got into this, whether it was technology or more mechanical things. Just how does it work? Can I break it? I know it sounds horrible saying it that way, but, can I get it to work in ways that it shouldn't? And, at the core of that is just curiosity. Do you want to figure out how things work? And I think that's where it all started. So,
where'd you grow up?
I grew up in a town called Bainbridge Island. It's in Washington State, just outside of Seattle.
And that is I think you live there now, right? I mean, so you've come and gone to various places, but you're back in that area.
Yeah. So without totally dating myself, 30 plus years later, I'm back where I started. That's actually a pretty existential statement. Not sure what that means yet.
Joel, you'll have to, when you figure out what it means, you'll have to let me know.
Exactly.
Well, that's cool. So I'm always curious, where did technology intersect with your life? Did it in your early formative years before you graduated high school? Was there a technology influence on your life?
Well, there was. I'll tell you what. It started out with Dungeons and Dragons, an old Atari 800 XL. So I don't know if this is a confession or not, but I'm a former dungeon master. Don't play much anymore, but was really into it back in the 80s when I was in high school. And it aligned with the time that my parents got me an Atari 800 XL, which, as you recall, oh boy, let's see if I can remember the specs on it, but I think it was 128K system, things like that. And when I got it, I discovered this weird little thing called BASIC programming language, right? And I realized, well, gosh, in the back of the DM's guide, there's these random dungeon generation tables. Well, you can code a few things and put a random number generator together, reference table, blah, blah, blah. And I figured out the way to spit out random dungeons just by leveraging the random dungeon generation tables. Yeah. So that was what really piqued me. And then, from there, as technology, computers, software, things like that, continued to evolve, it just opened things up further. In fact, man, what was the size of those disks? Because I had the floppy disk drive with that 800 XL as well. In fact, I think I needed it. You couldn't keep it all in memory. You had to read back. But
what was that?
That's where it all started.
5 1/4?
Yeah, it was the big one. And boy, that thing was loud. It was a brick. It was easily bigger than my laptop, certainly thicker dimension-wise and longer.
Yeah, that was it. Commodore 64 was my first introduction to technology, and 300 baud modem. So I was thinking of sort of early days as you were talking, and so I I also was a big fan of the D&D game, so I applaud your building out some automation with early basic programming. That's cool.
It was sitting right there. You had to do it.
Yeah.
Sorry, not to put it back on you, but what was your best and favorite character?
Oh, I probably in the different years I played, high school and a little bit in college, I drifted to the magic users, the wizards, always. Occasionally dabbled in other things, but pretty much always felt at home there.
Okay, I always gravitated toward the multi-class fighter thief. I mean, you got to have a skilled thief in every party, and can never really see your way around combat. So, seemed like a good combination.
Yeah. I love it. And then that game it's amazing. It's my children are playing. It's had a major resurgence. It's had this up and down, sort of an interesting story over all the decades since the founders created it, and now it's having quite a resurgence. And it's sort of fun to see that playing out.
It is role playing, and I'm, believe it or not, from a technology perspective, I'm really curious to see how augmented reality picks up some of these old role play gaming styles and can integrate those into an augmented reality scenario. I was telling my boys the other day, my fantasy before I die is I would like to be, Union Square, San Francisco, fighting lizard men someday in an augmented reality scenario. And I can just imagine everyone standing around watching us as we're acting out what we're doing and have no idea what's in front of us. But, we're going after lizard men.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. The pieces and parts for that sort of immersive experience are they're coalescing. You can see the different ingredients of that, coming together.
We're getting closer. Getting closer.
So what did you do after high school?
Well, after high school, I think like a lot of people, I felt like I should go to college. I should go to university. But I discovered initially going to university, it just wasn't a fit for me. I couldn't get into the academics. It was a drag. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do? I didn't want to sit around my hometown and, work at the local Safeway or something like that. That wasn't an option either. And I decided to go into the military. So I enlisted shortly, not long after high school.
What'd you do what was your MOS or specialty?
Yeah, so I was a 91 Alpha Papa, so I was a combat medic and also attached to an airborne unit. We were 109th Military Intelligence Battalion out of Fort Lewis, Washington, part of the 9th Infantry Division, and we were division scouts.
So what, during that time period, were you thinking, hey, I'll do a career in this, or you're like, this is sort of a stop on the way to something else? What was that transitional thought process and what did it lead to?
Well, that was doing something with myself that I found interesting at the time while I figured out what I really wanted to do.
Yeah.
And, it was a blast. I'm not sure what my veteran brothers and sisters will think, but I did not have to serve in combat, and I have deep respect for those who did. And quite honestly, I'm grateful that I didn't have to have that experience. Pretty sure it would have done my job, though, had I needed to go do that.
Yeah.
But got to go on a lot of interesting deployments, work with some pretty interesting comms equipment, and even learned, I'm not expert by any stretch, but establishing shortwave comms over long distances back to a communication center can be a really challenging thing, especially if you're on foot and you don't want to carry a bunch of antenna gear with you. So learned some cool stuff there. We did have some pretty interesting unit fun days where they pull in a Chinook, throw parachutes on our backs, do a big picnic and throw us out the back, and we'd come down and land and go do that a couple of times. Had to stay qualified, right? Got to get a certain number of jumps.
Yeah. Do you still jump out of airplanes today?
I don't, and it still scares me. It's an unnatural thing to do, but once your chute opens, it's pretty fun. You realize I am suspended in the air and I'm okay, and I know how to land this thing.
It's one of those things I've never done that I always wanted to. I don't know why that one, I never got to that. I do a lot with scuba diving, and that's sort of my passion area. But I never did the jumps, but that's cool. So what was your transition then? What happened getting out? What did you go do?
Well, I'd actually entertained trying to go into special forces at one point. They were dangling some pretty attractive dollars. Back in the day, I think, funny I remember this, they were offering like $48,000 to re-up, and I'd still have to go through the Q course and qualify. Because I was a combat medic, and I think the equivalent was I was trained up to that EMT level 2, I was pretty interested in the medical side of things, and believe it or not, the mindset is a little bit technical. You got to understand systems, you got to understand dependencies, all that kind of stuff. What they were dangling in front of me was the equivalent of education of a physician's assistant, but I would have owed another 8 years, and I was like, ooh, that is a long time, and 48,000 in 8 years just didn't seem like it was worth it. Decided to go back and take a try at academics again, and went to the University of New Mexico and studied cultural anthropology.
So you're not technology, which I think is interesting, and you're not alone in that. There are a variety of paths. Everybody I've interviewed, it's been so interesting. I am always looking for things that are common elements, and there are things that seem to be present in a lot of your stories, but sort of the stops on the way are so varied. So it wasn't a technology approach, and it wasn't a engineering approach, which is a big part of your life today. So I'm always curious as to when you're there and you're studying, and what happens. How does it end up leading? And not that we'll break down every single one of your stops, but you've worked for some major, very well recognized brands prior to ABB, even Sony and GE and HP. So quite a few technological enabled or directly technology companies. What were those early steps, and what do you remember about the choices you were making?
Well, so my first technology job was with Sony PlayStation, and it was after I'd moved north to the Bay Area. I was down in Southern California working some other jobs that weren't related to technology. Friends said this was back in the late 90s, and friends were like, it's crazy up here. You got to get up here. If you got a pulse, they'll give you a job and a nice salary. And I had an opportunity to get on the network QA team for the PlayStation 2 network adapter, and that was compelling to me. I liked gaming, even though I didn't study technology academically. I, of course, was messing around with computers and doing things and gaming and stuff like that, and informal education on it, if you will. Nothing better than just having to figure stuff out. So yeah, landed into a role where it was my job to break network gameplay and network gameplay experience. And we ended up getting pretty deep into that, but we had to figure it out.
And has that been technology ever since, or it's come and gone over the years?
Oh, I haven't left technology since then.
That started it, right? So yeah, with the Sony work and then ever since. I think one thing that sort of pops out that you said there was just being opportunistic. People were peers and friends, and people were saying, here's what's going on. You should come up here and plug in. And so you just went and did it. And there's something about that too. There's people in one particular place or coming out of the military and wondering what to do next. And some of it is putting the feelers out there and going without knowing for sure how something's going to work out. Is that true about sort of the approach you took?
Yeah, 100%. It sounds a little cliche, because it's all about building your network, that kind of thing. But it's a little bit different in Silicon Valley, which I worked in for the majority of my career. And this is prior to even looking at industrial automation systems in that space. It's really about projects and people that you enjoy working with, right? And so the way the culture works around that is, especially on the software side, upgrades, platforms, architectures, technology are changing so quickly, and there's kind of two types of engineers: those that like to build new stuff and those that like to sustain old stuff. I'm the type that likes to build new stuff and figure out new problems. And so from the cliched network perspective, someone leaves a company, goes somewhere else, whether it's a startup or a more mature organization, like, hey, I'm working on this. What are you doing right now? I don't know. I'm getting a little bored. What's going on? And that's kind of how it's always worked for me. I follow the thing that's interesting, and I've been fortunate enough that I've got some good folks that I've worked with throughout my career who always kind of are jumping around and working on interesting stuff.
I'm curious, how have you maintained, or how did you, and back then, how did you maintain those relationships as people move around, went to different places? Were you purposeful about that? I mean, what was it? Because I think how people build their network and maintain their network, it's not always clear to some entry level or earlier career folks how to do that.
Well, I got to confess, I'm pretty bad at maintaining my network, and it happens organically for me, and it's really a combination of just staying in touch with people that you click with, and, it ebbs and flows. Sometimes you're living in the same state with somebody and you spend more time with them, but I don't know, you enjoy working with people and they're off doing something else. 5 years later, they're in an interesting project and they remember, oh yeah, Rob kind of knew a few things about this, and you get a phone call or an email. Now, from a coaching perspective, I would recommend being a little more proactive than I've been, but don't be disingenuous. Like, just stay connected with people that you find interesting, and it never hurts, once a year or so, reach out to someone, see what they're doing, check in.
Yep, absolutely. Well, when did security intersect with this path?
Well, accidentally, really. So it started, I wouldn't have said it this way at the time, but it really started with Sony PlayStation, because as we built a wonderful lab environment where we were able to simulate, do network traffic shaping, do a lot of stuff in a controlled lab environment to either a dedicated host or a peer-to-peer setup in a gaming model, to really stress it and just see what was the gaming experience, what could the program actually handle and under what conditions, and where did it need to be relative to expected conditions. And we still had a lot of dial-up back then. But where it got more interesting was where we began to explore how can we exploit gameplay to our advantage by either tweaking the network with available tools, exploiting things within the game itself. So I didn't characterize it as really security per se, but at the time we found much more enjoyment in trying to figure out how to exploit each other and gain an advantage in gameplay, which in a lot of ways is fundamentally security. How do I take a perfectly good working system and bend it to my advantage in some way?
Was some of that with an eye to closing some of those up so that they couldn't be done by players out in the universe?
Absolutely. And so one of the things I appreciate working at Sony was their care for their brand. And that extends into all of their product lines. Sony, at least back then, I assume now as well, very much cared about the brand quality and the experience that end users would have. And so in that regard, whether it was a third-party or first-party title that was being released on the platform, the PlayStation platform, bugs, exploits, those kind of things were unacceptable. In fact, we created guidelines and standards around how the performance and exception handling of games needed to be managed by developers.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in a way, you were white hats on your own system there. So that's an interesting prelude to, things that you got involved with later. I don't know if it happened before. I know that at HP you were part of a security group there. Is that the formal sort of intersection?
No, not at all. So after I left Sony, I went to work for a company called SuccessFactors, and I thought it was interesting because they were doing cloud at the time, or software as a service at the time. I thought that was interesting. In keeping with the earlier theme, it was a friend of mine who I'd worked with at Sony had gone over there, and she called me up and said, "Hey, I'm over at this little startup called SuccessFactors. Do you want to do some different engineering stuff?" And I'd been at Sony, man, how long was it? It was a good 6 years, which is a long run in Silicon Valley. And I said, sure, why not? it was interesting because I was doing engineering program, and that was the role that I was brought into, which meant that I was into DevOps, I was into the planning and interface with product management and engineering. And we were supposed to be doing this thing called Agile, which I thought was insane at the time. I'm like, what? How's that ever going to work? So I got to cut my teeth on that concept, and I won't go into it for the purpose of this. We landed a really big customer that you probably heard of before, known as Siemens. And it was going to be a global deployment of our solution, and it was absolutely a marquee brand that the leadership wanted associated with us before going IPO. Well, guess what Siemens required in order for us to win the contract? Something called penetration testing and a thorough evaluation of our entire platform and architecture.
Yeah.
So, well, thinking about it out loud, I think compliance was probably my first rigorous and thorough introduction to security requirements. And it was in a cloud type of an architecture.
Yeah. Where was SuccessFactors? Which part of the valley?
So SuccessFactors was in Foster City, right across on the west. Yeah.
I lived there. I lived there. We could have crossed paths with each other because I was there. I lived there. I moved there in 2006, and I lived in San Mateo and then Foster City. So right there for 8 years.
I was there, and believe it or not, it was just on the north side of the 92. Sony was on the south side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went to the other side of the 92 to work for SuccessFactors.
Yeah. That's cool. I remember seeing the sign. That's why I was like, I think that's where we used to live. So yeah, that's cool. Anything from those early years then? I mean, that's, a company, I think now how many big companies require companies that are going to supply them to meet security rigor. That's become much more prominent. Not that many years ago, not everybody did that to their own potential detriment, but you were on the receiving end of that. It's like, hey, you got to do this if we're going to accept your work with you, accept your product, that sort of thing. Now that's I think a lot more common than it was then.
Yeah, for sure. And it really got us into my education around the rights and responsibilities around data as well, right? So for a European company, Siemens was mandating where their data could physically reside, which I didn't think about that before then, but like, yeah, okay, you actually want your data in a specific physical location. And then all the access control types of topics come up around that. Got into some intellectual property side of the issues too. One of the things that really stuck in my mind was the difference around ownership of the raw or native data that's collected and persisted versus derivative value that you can take from that data and who owns that. So that was a pretty cool, insightful learning event there.
So security then is coming in converging your path into industrial systems and control systems. When do those converge?
Yeah, so I took a number of two stints. I was at Yahoo after SuccessFactors, and then on to HP. HP was really where I think security was in my job description, so to speak, or my title. Prior to that, it was a consideration. It was a requirement. It was something we had to pay attention to. But it was at HP Fortify. Fortify was a standalone company that HP had acquired a number of years before. And I was brought in there to build a real-time application self-protection offering. And it was an agent-based approach that would implement into container-based applications and would actually, I don't know if this is the right term for it, but it would use a rule-based engine to evaluate calls made within the internal sort of URL of the application. And we got into a bunch of stuff, both static rule-based evaluation, but also behavioral-based analytics. So we would begin to profile what normal would look like in the day-to-day use of the software. We'd identify anomalies, etc. The whole point was, I think the secret sauce around the offering was this. Take SQL injection, for example. web application firewalls were a big deal at the time, and looking at variables that are being passed over the wire versus looking at variables passed within the context and logic of an application are two entirely different things. And we believe that the fidelity of our approach and the degree of false positives that you'd experience from a runtime application self-protection approach would be much better. And I was the product manager for a tool called HP Application Defender. And it was a combined cloud-based agent architecture and container-based applications, so .NET, Java, that kind of thing.
Then GE and ABB where you are today. And so in, the control systems aspects, I'm assuming, I know they're part of your world now. Was that at HP or GE? Were industrial control systems part of it?
Right. So how did I get into industrial control systems?
This is, Rob, this is really sort of a critical moment in the conversation, because there's a lot of people outside, let's say, our community saying, where do people come from? And of course, the big answer is they come from all sorts of different backgrounds. And people have their favorite, like, I'd rather have an engineer that learns cybersecurity. I'd rather have a cybersecurity person, that then learns some plant stuff, learns about safety. Yeah, I've heard it all. But people do come from lots of different backgrounds because we don't have enough people. So the workforce working to protect, critical systems and control systems is diverse. It's, a lot of people we're missing. We need more people. They're going to have to come from different backgrounds. And so I think this is always a curious part of the conversation, is like where your journey intersected with it.
Nope, you nailed it. This is the critical moment here. So hopefully, if you listen to anything else, this is where it happened. One of the executives from HP that I worked with went over to something called GE Digital. And this was, it wasn't at the beginning, but it was not long after, when they were forming GE Digital. They figured out their organizational model, et cetera, et cetera. GE pumped an amazing, billions of dollars into this endeavor. And I got a phone call, and, same thing. What are you doing? You still happy there at HP? We're doing this thing called GE Digital, automation control systems. We were mostly focused on GE gas turbines. I think my jaw drops. I think GE equipment and kit accounts for a third of the world's power generation. So huge footprint. And, listened to the pitch, went in and met some of the folks. The GE Predix side, that made sense to me, what they were trying to do with my software and cloud background that I had. The automation control system side, I was like, I don't know what this stuff is. But that can either be a good or a bad thing in anyone's career. You can either say, well, that's scary, I don't know what it is, I have no competency into it. Or you can say, oh, cool, a whole nother area to go explore. And that's how I started. I was asked to come over and help organize and grow a product line. And that's kind of where I was at in my career. I'd done the engineering program management, the engineering DevOps side of things. I'd done the product development and commercialization side of things. And it was intriguing to me. Here's this whole new space. It seems to be emerging. It seems to have a place. And it gets me into this whole industrial side of things, which I've never really thought about. That was how it happened. And I was asked to put together a portfolio and figure it out.
Any interesting stories from your early exposure to that side of the house?
Absolutely. And you know what? I'm going to tie back the academic piece here. So cultural anthropology. If you want to understand how things work, or you want to understand what's really going on, start walking around and talking to people who are really working with the stuff. So, and this is still relevant today. I'm going to sound like I'm getting on a podium or a pedestal here, but the software cloud engineering side still doesn't go and talk to the operators and the automation system architects, the people who've been building and solving problems on this stuff for decades. And they come in and say, well, I can do this, this, and this. I got tapped into some of the architect team for the Mark 6E, some of the guys who actually built and figured it all out. And I won't use a name, but one of my favorite people there, I'm still in touch with him. You know, older guy. He was one of the original architects of the Mark 6E, and I don't know how far he went back in the vintages behind that. But, you know, he told me one day, he goes, because he was tasked with helping the digital team, he goes, you know, Rob, it's interesting. A lot of the problems that they want to solve around the Mark 6E, and we're talking about asset performance management and collecting and trying to divine intelligence from data tags, all that kind of stuff. He goes, we've already figured out 95% of those problems. So they're going back and rediscovering the same things that we've already figured out. And nobody comes and asks us, what are the really hard problems that you haven't been able to figure out in the design of the Mark 6E that maybe data science can help with? And I still see a lot of that. We're kind of reinventing solutions to problems that, you know, the original design is already figured out, which is a good thing and a bad thing, because the good side of it, and I won't drag it out too much here, the good side of it is those systems and designs, if you know how to ask them certain questions, they'll give you answers to these things. They already have that information. It's already considered. And then figuring out the gaps. How do you really add value with additional technology, data science, et cetera? I find that whole thing fascinating. And I still find that divide between these two domains to be fascinating. It's like, why don't you guys get together and talk, make a combined roadmap? You got some really smart engineers on both sides, and you guys just aren't talking.
Hey everybody, Derek Harp here, and I just want to take a brief moment to thank three companies that make this podcast series possible. The first company is Waterfall Security Solutions. They led the charge this year for the podcast, and they specifically sponsored it from their podcast, the Industrial Security Podcast. So check that out. That's a great linkage to an entire other series of over 100 episodes. They had their anniversary recently, focused on control system cybersecurity. And they were supported this year by KPMG and Fortinet. We could not do this without them. These companies not only have supported this podcast series this year, but they've supported CSAE since its very early days 8 years ago. And we're entirely grateful to the teams and dedicated professionals at Waterfall Security Solutions, KPMG, and Fortinet.
There's such a call for that, what you just described, to be better than it is. Bridge building, trust building, whatever phrase you want to use, is really called for in so many places in the same company. It's like we work for the same company, but there's still, disconnect at best and distrust at worst between various stakeholders. I keep hearing these stories, and it's just like, oh, come on. But the success stories I hear a lot of time have themes. One of the themes you mentioned, which is I go over there and I ask those guys. I go over my lunch and I say, hey, can you show me how all this works? And it's amazing what doors will open up. And maybe I take a box of donuts and build those bridges. And so the future, if people will do more of that, the future could be quite bright. Like you said, they could be not doing some work or great efforts that maybe aren't necessary. We could focus. We could leverage the best expertise of multiple stakeholders that have different professional and technological backgrounds and engineering backgrounds. And there's a call for that, right? Break down some of those barriers or resistances.
Well, and good old-fashioned product management and a self-critique. Right now in my current role, and get into that later, I don't go out with and spend time on site with operators enough. And I'll keep it quick. I got two stories. One was a product called OpShield, which was from a company that GE acquired. It was, network capture-based passive analysis, but it also had a protection function to it as well. We don't have to go into OpShield and WorldTech, but it was a bump-in-the-line solution that you'd put at the last mile to the controllers. We were at a dispatched power plant. I won't name the company or the location. And we knew reasonably that we could do a hot install of this thing. And it would not or should not trip the plant or disrupt availability. Went in there, met with a lot of the operators. We were talking, met the guy who was in charge of security for the site. They all agreed, yeah, we agree with you. You can do this. It's okay. But, mind you, this plant was dispatched. which is a pretty big deal. The plant manager, I'll never forget this, when we were doing the install, she was pacing outside of the control room. She was pacing around, and she even came in at one point in time. It turns out she was pinging different nodes from her office in the automation control system. She'd come in and say, hey, I noticed we no longer have a network between this and this. And we're like, it's okay. It's just going to be another, minute or so. There's redundancy. And I mean, you know exactly why she was doing it, because she's the one who was going to get the phone call when they failed to deliver energy to the market. So that was a great experience. And again, like, you got to get out there and just work with and talk with people who are doing the work, get their understanding of security. Sometimes you'll be pleasantly surprised. Sometimes you'll be disappointed, like it's an inconvenient truth, kind of like climate change. Nobody's looking for another thing to do in a lot of those environments.
Yeah.
Which is a great insight to productization, right? The care and feeding of this stuff. Sorry, the second one. The second one, I had a chance to be in the Middle East, and it was a cement production facility. And these guys just wanted to figure out what they had and where it was and put some automation in place so they could maintain an inventory. And we were talking about how to do that. It was this was with ABB. This was ABB Kit. And one of the operators, we were walking around there showing me where everything was. It was fascinating. We were out in the Saudi desert in the middle of nowhere. And they were showing me the facility, which, again, go out, walk with these people, see the site, actually see where things are. It's amazing. And he pointed at a PLC that was off in a corner of some warehouse looking thing, and it was half buried in sand. And he said, that thing's been running. We haven't restarted it for 15 years. We every once in a while go brush the sand off of it, but it keeps going. And he was very proud of that. So again, you don't get those insights unless you're on the ground, you're seeing the conditions that these systems are working in and the challenges, the problems that these people actually want to solve, not only as operators, but as a business.
Yeah, that's I love both of those experience shares. So let's, jump to what you're doing now. Now, I think some people may not be aware. I mean, obviously people who are deeply in the industry know that large equipment manufacturers, the Siemens, the ABBs, the Rockwells, some of you have cybersecurity businesses. It's one thing to say cybersecurity work being done there to create product that's more secure, but then there's these other side of the house and where there's actually services. And so that's, I think if you could hold forth a little bit on what the mandate and vision for that is at a big global, huge global company like ABB.
All right, well, that's a really big question. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is you've heard of the Peter Principle before, right? You find yourself elevated to the highest level of your personal, professional incompetence. That's a slightly negative way to put it, and a more positive way to put it is, are you continuing to stretch yourself in your career, right? So one of the things that I enjoy, and I actually took a little bit of time out there and went and did a master's in business, in part because I felt like I needed to, and I maybe thought it was wasted time, because what I really like doing is figuring out product solutions. In fact, who knows, maybe one day I'm going to get back to just doing that. But the opportunity both at GE and at ABB was to put together and curate a portfolio of products and services that actually solve problems that people have, right? And you've probably heard the old cliche of someone comes up with a clever technology or approach to something, and, it's a solution looking for a problem. And I see that mistake made far too often, and I see a lot of clever marketing spun around solutions that are looking for problems. I've got a very different sort of philosophy around portfolio and commercialization, and it's, you got to focus on the problems that are really going to have impact for those who care about it. And those who care about it actually have to agree that you're solving a problem in a way that represents value for them. So what does that mean for my current role? It means that in our strategy and in our portfolio, we have to be continuously thinking about what is our approach to bringing we think about it in terms of capability maturity, like a capability maturity model, right? Don't go for the really high-end expensive approach when you haven't done the basic kind of hygiene stuff. And I think far too often, well, let me talk about one of the challenges that our customers have, because I think this will really speak to it. They're big business challenges. They're challenges of budget and scale. And so if you're going and trying to curate the product side cybersecurity program and approach, and you're doing it vendor by vendor across a global scale, you're going to get killed, right? And so when I think of value to a large customer who has sites that are distributed regionally, not only in their program, but around their governance and their strategy, standardization is absolutely essential around procurement, delivery, maintenance, all those kind of things. And so at an ABB or a GE or any of my present day competitors, I'm not sure that message is echoed loudly enough, because that's a core problem, right? We can get into the security specifics, but just how do I curate, deploy, maintain, and then audit whether or not the program that I think should be in place is in fact in place, and it can't cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and it needs to be done in shorter than 10 to 15 years. So not sure how I got there, but I think that's one of the things that I find interesting, because it is a combination of both technology and the commercial side, and it goes across the whole value chain of stakeholders in the organization. Whoever the poor soul is who, when the board said this is a priority, who got tapped and said, guess what, Derek, you now own automation cybersecurity. Go figure it out and report back to us in 2 weeks. Now, hopefully you got more time than that. You care about different things than, the local operator or the plant manager does. And so really understanding how you stitch that all together and put together a program that someone can get started with, improve over time, and then measure whether or not they're actually having impact against the goals that they've identified, primarily around risk. That's really cool. And it's a hard problem. It's really hard.
Yeah, that's not trivial, but it makes sense. How do I do this? How do I actually do it? Out of the theoretical into the practical, and afford to do it, time and money, resources that are going to be consumed to do it, and achieve my mission, which isn't security, by the way, or efficiency even. It's whatever it is they do. I got to achieve that mission, and oh, by the way, I know I got to do these other things. That's in a nutshell, that is the challenge, right? And it is not trivial.
And I love it. And I don't think we're really good at it yet, but we're getting better. And so I would love to see it get to a more mature state, a more globally adopted, agreed upon set of standards. I'd love to see it move away from point solutions and more into program and governance and kit and those kind of things. I think it touches all the levels, right? It touches critical infrastructure, national security. It touches what many of the operators care about is, that thing, that asset needs to be available and doing performing its function for whatever the business is.
Yeah. Well, spanning all those years, in either going back or recent, any words of wisdom that you want to pass on to people in the industry? We have listeners of all shapes. We've got people that are quite experienced, curious to hear their peer stories, and we've got entry level and earlier stage career people that are making critical choices about their path. We have people knocking on the front door, coming to some of our events and saying, how does one break into this industry? Or IT people saying, how do I break into this, OT or ICS, cyber arena? And so do you think there's any sort of anything comes to mind, like this is, I guess something you learned along the way or observed along the way that you want to pass on to everybody?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple. Be curious. Think about, find opportunities, work opportunities that are in a space that you're willing to dedicate your thought and effort to. I don't have any regrets around the sort of sidewinder path of my career to date. In fact, I used to wonder, why don't I have a bigger vision for myself? It's absolutely okay to follow and pursue the things that you find intellectually interesting. Because at the end of the day, I think the worst possible thing, and this is a projection for myself, the worst possible thing that could happen is you're stuck in a job that is not intellectually challenging, is the domain just, you don't wake up in the morning and go, I get to think about this, right? That would be terrible. So there's no written path. I mean, be curious, position yourself, go work in things. I mean, just because you're in IT doesn't mean that you can't come over to OT. OT needs a lot of your skill set, but you need to understand the priorities that the operators have and adjust your approach. I think anyone in IT could come over, and if they spend the time working with operators, spend a little bit of time. They don't need to master automation control system or ladder logic or anything like that. Leave that to the operators and engineers on that side. But they need to understand what their priorities are. They know that they can't just go do a rolling update on HMIs and workstations anytime they want. But if they work with them, schedule it, proof out some sort of automated approach, et cetera, operators are reasonable. They just don't want you to come in and disrupt availability. It's pretty simple. But yeah, be curious. Go work in areas and domains that when you wake up in the morning, how about this? Let me boil it all down. If you wake up in the morning and you don't tell yourself, I get to go think about this and work on this, you're in the wrong job. Simple as that.
Sage advice. That's not a bad wrap up for anybody in any walk of life, really, right? And sadly, a lot of people are waking up and not able to answer that in a positive way. I mean, I'm not picking on our arena. It's true in lots of arenas, and it's a shame to spend one's life doing something that there's no passion for and no excitement for.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Rob, we come to my one of my favorite parts of doing these with all of you, where I borrow a questionnaire, 10 questions from a television show that I loved for years. It was called Inside the Actors Studio, and the longtime host James Lipton has passed on. But for decades, he interviewed all the great actors and actresses on his stage at the acting school in New York, where he was the dean. And this show was televised in over 100 countries. And he ended the show with this thing that he called the Pavo Questionnaire. So I looked it up, and it's from some French show that he borrowed it from. And so I've made no changes to it. And sort of as a nod to its heritage, if you're up for it, I'll give you the same 10 questions as our wind up.
Let's do it. Curious to see how I do.
All right. What is your favorite word?
Well, it changes over the years. My favorite word right now is malice.
What is your least favorite word?
Hygiene.
What turns you on, either creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
That's a really good one. I'd say what gets me really excited is looking at a perfectly functioning system or logic or belief and asking the question, what if they got it wrong?
What turns you off?
Lack of curiosity, just accepting the status quo. I mean, it doesn't mean the status quo isn't good enough, but you're not curious. So lack of curiosity, that's a turn off.
And what is your favorite curse word?
Oh, my favorite curse word? I think forgive me, but it's fuck. It's the most dynamic word in the entire world. We could do a whole podcast on that word.
What sound or noise do you love?
I love the sound of undisturbed nature. So getting out, hiking, being in the mountains, and sitting and seeing what you can hear, because there's a lot there.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's not the usual, fingernails on the chalkboard kind of thing. Oh, I know what it is. It's people sniffling when they've got a runny nose and they just keep doing it. Ugh.
And what profession other than your own would you like to attend?
Sorry, what's that again?
What profession other than your own would you like to attend?
Well, it's not a regret. But if I were to go back, and it wouldn't have worked when I was younger, but I would love to be in medicine.
What profession would you not like to do?
Fast food.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Congratulations. You didn't have to, you didn't figure it all out, and you didn't have to.
Thank you for coming on the show. I'm just ending with Rob Putman. He is the global manager of cybersecurity services at ABB Process Automation. Thank you for coming on the show and for all your years contributing to the cybersecurity industry and to our modern technology-based society, and for your passion and curiosity, and that we all benefit from that, I think, downstream. So thank you for all that, and I look forward to our next chat together.
Always a pleasure, Derek. Thanks for having me on. Enjoy your day. Take care.
Take care, Rob.
Hi, everyone. This is Derek Harp, the founder and chairman of the Control Systems Cybersecurity Association International, or as we call it, just CSA. CSA is a 501c6 nonprofit workforce development association dedicated to helping grow, support, and sustain the professionals charged with the cybersecurity of control systems. We're specifically talking about those systems that have pumps and valves and actuators, real cyber to physical moving parts, and control nearly every aspect of our modern connected industries. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. It is my hope you find it inspirational or motivating or revealing or informative, and perhaps at times even a little entertaining. Take care and be well.